Hello Internet, it's Daniel with Driving Dragons. Today I'm back. We're going to be putting the slave cylinder for the clutch on the 280. Got it up on the lift. I'm also going to go ahead and knock that oil pan down. Today we are going to talk about excess. Most things that are bad are generally okay things or good things taken to excess, or the old idea that even water is poison if you drink too much of it. In particular, what I'm talking about is how too much of even of a good thing is the hallmark of bad ideas and bad things in the tabletop role-playing game space. It's kind of funny because you see it everywhere. You see it on both sides of the fence. You see it from the excessively Care Bear player base. I'm not even going to say a political leaning in this case. I'm just going to say that this is the new player Care Bear players. And when I say Care Bears, of course I'm referencing back to MMORPGs where you have the players who are constantly trying to find ways to make it where they can't get PvP'd without 14 forms of consent, and there's ways for them to back out of everything so that they can't get interrupted while they're doing the raid or whatever the case may be. And they're constantly trying to push the developer to make changes, permanent changes to the game that prevent griefing and other things on the big scale. But in general, they want to restrict everybody else's ability to do just about anything because they just can't hack it when somebody else does something a little cheap on one side or the other. And you get this also on like the hardcore bro SR side or the simulationist side where everybody wants everything to be super realistic and really hard down and tacked down to the hardest of the hard rules. And it basically comes from any form of an extreme. And the honest truth of the matter is that most bad ideas and most things that are kind of stupid come from the extreme. And you can even see this in the arguments. Whether you're arguing about safety tools or arguing about one-to-one timing or arguing about simulationism or arguing about death saves or whatever the case may be, no matter what you're arguing about, you'll find somebody who steps in and immediately strawmans, and they use the most basic strawman you can, which is they go to a radical extreme and represent that as the whole. The problem is that in this internet world where no ground can be given, 9 times out of 10, instead of stepping back and saying, hey, hold on a second, man, what you're talking about is stupid, but it's good in these situations, or whatever I'm talking about works in this particular situation, or it enhances this type of gameplay, etc., you find the people jumping in to defend that extreme. And when that extreme becomes indefensible, they'll turn around and try and say that's not what they said, or that you're mischaracterizing what they said and they never said it, and that sort of thing. And it gets out of hand and it gets stupid and it blows up into these little mini controversies on X or Twitter or whatever they call it these days. So I just want to run down a couple of these and kind of follow the route. I'm going to start with something I've already picked on, and that is safety tools. Safety tools, as a general rule of thumb, are gradations of excessive player care. They come from a good place in a lot of ways. They come from the way you should really use a session zero, and they really just are a growth of the expression, don't be a dick. Okay, don't be a dick. That's usually all you need. You don't need safety tools. You just need don't be a dick. You know that a certain group is not going to play well with certain extremes. You know the group that you're with, and like if you know that if you're going to go to certain levels of graphic detail on things that are beyond social norms, or if you're going to cross into certain taboos or discuss certain extreme topics, that you should probably make sure that the rest of your group fits in with that particular kind of play. And this can be from anything. This could be any kind of political ideation that you're going to work into your game. This could be any kind of like abuse situations or dark subject matter, personal subject matter. This can be player behavior such as sexual content or romantic subplots or anything of that nature, all the way up to things that are just, like I said, just taboos and whatnot. Are you going to include this? Are you not going to include this? Are your players okay with it? Are they not? That's not a bad thing. That's just called being a decent human being, and that's what we've done for years. And if you hear somebody like me argue against safety tools, I'll say, well, that's really all you need is just don't be an ass. But what have they done? They've tried to formalize the safety tools. They've tried to run them out. They've taken them to that extreme that makes them a terrible thing. It's no longer just, hey, make sure everybody's kind of cool with it, and you can tell when you're sitting at the table and you can see somebody getting uncomfortable that maybe you should back off a little bit, to turning it into, okay, give players lines and veils. They get to walk up to you at the very beginning and say, you're not allowed to do this, and you're only allowed to kind of halfway mention this. These are my lines and veils, and you have to craft everything around this. And if you remove me from the group because you don't like my lines and veils, well, now you're an asshole game master. You're supposed to make the whole table conform to whoever the softest player is emotionally. And it goes out even further to things like your X card, where it's, I literally have the ability to completely stop the game and derail everything, throwing this thing out for any reason. And we're not even going to talk about the exploitable nature of it, where it's just like, oh shit, I'm losing, so let me throw down the X card and I'll make up something that I'm suddenly scared of or not okay with. Just from on its face is you now have given a player a method to just derail everything in a story that's uncomfortable. And you have taken this to an extreme that is foolish, an extreme that is detrimental, an extreme that hurts everybody at the table and the game as a whole, and hurts the hobby. And unfortunately, you got people like generic Jenny D and her crew who want to just ram those safety tools down your throat. Your Indestructisoys and these folks. They just want to ram that down your throat. On the opposite end of the spectrum, let's go and look at a more modern one, a more recent one. And actually what triggered me to sit down and make this little rant video. One-to-one timing. There's a method for one-to-one timing. There really is. There's ways it can be used logically. If you're running like the West Marches style game and you tell people, hey, game time passes at real time, etc., which means that you're role playing out. If it's an hour walk from the table, from the castle or whatever to the caves, you role play out the entire hour before you get there. And everybody's clock is kind of set that way. But you get these people who take it to an extreme, and an extreme that is completely illogical. It doesn't even work in a perfect world where everybody is just a nerd who has no life outside of playing tabletop role-playing games and nothing else to do in their life. You'll have situations where Will over at Diversity and Dragons comes out and says, what do you do when somebody is going to take a 2-month-long boat journey from New York to Cairo? And it's like, well, I guess they just don't play for 2 months. Or you're going to have to just, for 2 months, you're just going to have to play whatever's happening on the boat at that point in time. For the most part, this is just very foolish. What you've done is you've condemned your players to only making short-term decisions, because nobody's going to take the 2-month boat ride and then be like, well, I guess I'm not playing anymore for 2 months. Or they're only going to take the 2-month boat ride when everybody knows they're not going to be there. This gets even worse when you're talking about a West Marches style campaign, when you have multiple other groups who are still interacting in the world while the other people are off. So generally, when I say one-to-one, the only way one-to-one really works is basically everybody's clock moves while it's at the table. So, for instance, we all start at midnight on Monday, and I play 5 hours with one group. That group is now at 5 a.m. on Monday. But when the next group comes in and sits down to play, they're starting at midnight on Monday, and they're playing through that same 5 hours, even though one played on Monday and one played on Tuesday. That's the appropriate way to do like a one-to-one, is each group is operating within their time frame and is operating within the time frame of the other groups. Not, hey, we're going to be stuck playing for 4 months. You're on a dirigible trip. It's going to take you a month and a half to get across the Atlantic. Well, then we play every week. So you mean for the next several weeks, we're going to spend, the next 4 weeks, we're going to show up and we're going to role play out playing tiddlywinks on the deck of the dirigible and looking out at the ocean below and literally having nothing happen. It's a private chartered flight. And I sure hope there's a gas leak or some other major problem that we can rush in to solve to make something interesting happen here. But that's an example of something that is good, one-to-one timing to keep groups together, being taken to a stupid extreme that is both impractical, illogical, and just doesn't work within the game. That stems from a good thing. And you have to have the game master's ability to kind of fast forward the clock a little bit. Maybe that group, instead of starting midnight on Monday, they're like, well, we slept for 5 hours, so we're going to be at up to the furthest group ahead. And we'll start playing there. So everything that's happened that they've done has already happened. You have to, there's a travel thing. All right, these people are going to be traveling for the next 4 hours, so we have the ability to fast forward that and jump ahead in time between sessions as long as it doesn't impact those other tables. And you take that, you run it to the extreme to where everything is always one-to-one and it's tied to the real world and it's tied to our regular time, and it's the dumbest thing on the planet when John, his firstborn, is early to the delivery room while you're in the middle of the big bad evil guy fight, and it's like, well, I guess you just put your sword down and sit there while the lich kills you and kills your party because you had to run and go take care of your baby being born because some idiot is religiously adhering to one-to-one time. You see this also with railroading. Railroading is another thing where excessiveness is a problem, and it's kind of funny because railroading cuts both ways. It cuts in the fact that railroading in and of itself is an extreme of linear story or story progression. You have a poorly written linear storyline or a DM, game master, whatever, who does not craft things in a way to point the players towards a particular objective or whatever. And now they have to eliminate agency and eliminate choice in order to slap them on the rails and force them to go to one place or the other. So railroading in and of itself is just an extreme of something that is very good, a linear storyline. But when I said it cuts both ways, it's on the other side. When people start arguing and complaining about railroading, people will complain about railroading not just when it's railroading, but any linear story or progression whatsoever. In any situation where something comes up where a player does not have the authority or the ability to directly alter the outcome and change how things happen, all of a sudden it gets labeled railroading. And protecting against railroading and being on lookout for it and pointing it out to a game master is not a bad thing. It can help that game master be better. However, calling every single thing that happens to have a linear progression that goes from point A to point B railroad is a problem of that extreme. The last but not least in this rant that I'm just going to go off on, and I need to go off on it, and you all already know what it is if you've been watching my channel at all for any length of time, it's player agency. Player agency is the most important thing in all role-playing games. It really is. Your players must have the authority to make their own decisions, to take their own actions within the confines of the game and the confines of reality. If the player wants to stand up and jump on the table, he needs the ability to stand up, have his character stand up and jump on the table. Unless there is something that physically prevents him from doing it. If he has the ability, if there's nothing restraining him, he can jump on the table. Now, the consequences of his action are his problem. And there should be those consequences, which is where it comes down to the player agency, a very good, very important thing, being taken to a stupid extreme, has done immeasurable damage to the tabletop role-playing game hobby and community as a whole. How? Because we have gone from agency means I get to control what my character decides and does. I get to control how my character acts. To player agency not only controls what happens to my character, what the ultimate end for my character is, whether or not he lives or dies, whether or not he is replaced within the story, whether or not he gets the girl, falls in love with the princess falls in love with him or her, whatever the case may be, but it even extends beyond the table to where you have these idiots out here talking about how player agency involves the player being able to dictate how the campaign is written, dictate how monsters are played, how enemies make decisions, and just otherwise, really dictate even other players to a certain extent. And that is player agency to the point that it literally harms the game and harms the hobby, because it's expanded to a sense of radical player entitlement. But every single one of these things that you can look at, one-to-one timing, player agency, safety cards, even when it comes to, crafting characters, game system, house rules, all these things, they're all good things, but they get taken to an extreme that makes them not only totally objectionable, but objectively bad for the hobby. So, what do you got below? Like I said, it's a little bit rambly. I get it. A little bit ranty. What have you seen that is really just a matter where people have taken everything to such a massive extreme that it's not even functional anymore in this hobby? What do you think needs to disappear and go away? Is it adherence to rules as written to an extreme that you actively ignore the fact that all these games say that there's flexibility in the rules for the game master? Is it homebrew to the point where it's completely game breaking and unbalancing in the name of player agency and crafting the perfect character? Is it forcing adherence to backstories to the point where the backstory, just forget whatever the GM wrote as the campaign, it's now this character's backstory because my backstory, my agency? Where do you see the excess of taking something to that internet level extreme coming back and being a massive detriment to the hobby and taking a good thing, turning it into trash? All right, next time, guys, we should be finished up with the slave cylinder, and I'll be getting the oil pan gasket on. Obviously, a lot of this work's done ahead of time and has been recorded and whatnot, so be looking forward. I've got the car running, and I think I'll be putting some video of that up soon, independently, just so we can all sit back and hear the engine rumble. See you guys next time.